Welcome to the second half of the session topic from Auxiliary Section Methods, Hatching, and CTB. This second half we're going to cover the topic sectioning, hatching, and CTB files. Alright, so you can see the topics and page numbers on the screen. So we're going to jump right in with sectioning, understanding what sectioning is, and then applying hatching to that. So once again, I'm going to show you a couple of pages from the book. This particular page, which is 692, the act of creating a section view is a drafting task, and it is a major type of a drafting task that would be evident in all kinds of drawings. Here you see a mechanical example at the bottom of the page, but it would absolutely be part of architectural, civil, really any drawing that you create that is a physical object will likely have some sort of a section view involved in it. So it is highly recommended that if you don't comprehend the act of creating a section view, that you do whatever it takes to do so. I'm going to give you some basic examples of that here, but it would go beyond that. Alright, on this page you can see along the left margin that it describes the different types of sectioning. And it's a little fuzzy, but you can see it's full section, offset, aligned, revolved, removed, and there's also something called broken out, which is very popular in architectural and civil. Whatever type of section view that you would engage in, you can see that likely one of the views would have that line with the arrow on it. That is what's known as the cutting plane line, and you can see that right here. Cutting plane line identifies the location of the section. I believe I gave a very crude but relatable example of if you purchase a bagel and you want butter on it, the person behind the counter would cut it right down the middle. So the act of cutting it would have to be shown, or the path of the cut would be shown in the one view, and then the other view, as if you literally look into the cut section of the bagel where you would spread the butter or cream cheese, what have you, that surface would be shown with the striped lines. So as you can see in the example there, those striping indicates the actual cut surface. Okay, another example of hatching and creating section views that you can see on this page, which is 693. This is graphically showing us various types of section views. The one you see at the top is called an aligned section, and this one is probably one of the more advanced ones, but notice the cut plane goes horizontal until it reaches the center and then goes off on an angle to go through the center of that. And that's a rule unto itself. Whenever you have something round, you must go through the center. So in the case of this shape, you have to change the direction of the cut plane line. Yet if you projected this straight down, that would give you a very awkward appearing section view. So this aligned says you are going to align it as if this surface were flat across. That way you could project everything down as normal. Now, of course, this is not truly what it is, because it's, from the center line to the right would be angling backwards. But for the simplicity, that is why they do that. For the simplicity, you show it in the section view as if it is a flat plane. Okay, so that's an important basic concept. Here's an example of a revolved section, and this is ideal when you don't have a lot of room to create other views. In the case of this, you have a front view and a top view. You don't always have that luxury, so you can create a paper thin slice and rotate it right in place, as you can see in the left. Or in here, you're actually tearing it away with just a freehand looking line and then placing it on its own in between there. Can't always do that. due to perhaps some hole patterns that run across there, and you'd be losing that much of the object. But when you can, it's an effective use. Also down here, this is also a revolved type of section where you're showing in this view the cuts through the section of that, and then you would organize that off to the side, and you have this labeling system. So this section A-A is denoting that cut plane, and so forth. In civil and architectural, it's highly likely that the results of this section wouldn't even be on that same page. You would have to then invoke another system that would tell you the section plane, in this case A, but then there would be another little note that might say A-3, which would mean on sheet A3, and you'd have to look at the other drawings to find that. So that's a common system as well. Okay, the other side to sectioning, and really in AutoCAD it's called hatching, is what you would see in the upper half. The hatch patterns, if you will. It's a library of symbols that you would grab and then apply to your drawing. Really makes it come alive. So I want you to notice in this picture, this is something you're going to have an assignment where you have to duplicate, or not specifically duplicate, but use this as your model. And notice what's happening in here. So you're not necessarily cutting anything, but you're using the sectioning symbols to make this drawing look more realistic and certainly come to life instead of it just being lines. So I want you to take notice, not only does sectioning serve the purpose of cutting something, but it also serves the purpose of graphically enhancing. So that's exactly what this is. Number one, you have materials, right? So we could tell that there's shingles, and here's brick, and here's siding, and so forth. So it applies materials. Two, in combination with line thicknesses, it can show depth. So the implication here is that this middle section is set further back, and what you would do is you would apply a solid blue hatching with a high degree of transparency to just give it a little bit of shading. And that shading, along with what you can see over on the far right side of the house, gives you the illusion of depth, that it's set back farther. And on the windows, it's also a solid hatch, which would have a different degree of transparency. Otherwise, it would just be very bold blue, just to give you the glass effect. Okay, so we're going to try to emulate this. I'm going to give you another house shape, which will just be lines. And along with a little taste of what we learned last class with the CTB by making your walls thick, we're going to continue with that in addition to these hatch materials to really enhance and dress up a drawing. Okay, so those are the two aspects of sectioning. And one last thing on the bottom half of this page, again it shows you a mechanical example with multiple uses of sectioning. For example, here is your cutting plane line, cutting it right down from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. That would be known as a full section, when you slice it on one flat plane from side to side. So this view shows you the entire cut view, but because these holes, it's not clearly communicated the angle of these holes, and you know you're not supposed to dimension to a hidden line, so that's the other value of sectioning. When something's hidden, you have to dimension it. You can cut it open. So that's what's been done here. It's a broken out section where you're literally tearing it away. Think of if this thing was made out of concrete and you got a hammer and chisel to break away to get down to the feature you need to see. Now it's visible, and now I can dimension it. Okay, so those are all of the uses of sectioning, and it's a very valuable tool to apply to your drawings. And if you don't feel like you have good enough knowledge, you know there's many resources. Google, purchase or try to get a drafting text, and there'll be plenty of information relating to sectioning. Okay, so let's jump right on in, and I'm going to take us into a drawing. And the first thing we're going to do is create some hatch, but in order for us to do that we have to draw some things. So I want you to uh, create the following shapes. I'm not applying any specific sizes to them. So I'm in a drawing as usual, and that I just started from scratch, and I'm just going to draw some shapes. Let's say we'll start with rectangle, and I'm going to draw a circle off, snapping to the corner and just off the corner of it. I'm going to draw another rectangle inside it, and then I'm going to draw another rectangle out in space that we'll do something with later. And then just with regular lines, this is a freestyle, kind of a sloppy thing, just to show you that it doesn't have to be doesn't have to be drawn to perfection to hatch. And then one last touch, I'm going to go with single line text, right? So we have to get to the single line text here. And I'm going to just click in this open space. I'm looking at the height 0.2. I'm going to up it to 0.5 so that it's easier to see. And if it's too big, we'll deal with that in a second. Okay, so now I'm going to, with caps, just type in the word text, just so that we have something there. Alright, so get those three shapes drawn. And you know you can always pause this. So get it drawn and then continue. The next thing I'd like you to do is to create a layer for the actual sectioning. And that's very important, and I'll explain why later, but for now I'm going to go to my layer properties and I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call it sectioning. And I'm going to make it green. There's no specific reason why I'm making that green. And then make that layer current. Alright, so we are ready to create the actual section lines, and AutoCAD refers to that process as hatching. Okay, so to create hatching, the hatch button is in your draw panel in the lower right corner. So you're simply going to pick on that little symbol, and you will see the entire ribbon will change to all things relating to hatching. There's a lot of little features in here. We are going to start out with not doing anything up there. I'm going to just keep all the defaults, and what you simply need to do is bring your mouse into the bounding area. I'm going to zoom in to make that a little easier to see. Okay, so as long as you bring your mouse into the boundary, it will immediately seek out and display a preview of the hatch. If this is what you want, you simply click. So I click, it shows a highlighted boundary, and I could go on and pick other areas if needed, but I'm done, so I'm going to press enter. Okay, so as you can see, creating the hatch is a simple process, but like other things, there are conditions that would not make it that easy. I will address them soon. Alright, so here we have lines. This is your classic sectioning symbol. This is really known as a generic hatch. It could be used for anything, but typically if you were creating a drawing of official purpose, meaning you were going to publish it for a patent, for a textbook, you would want to use a symbol that represents the material that has been cut. Alright, so if I go back and pick the hatch button again, this material is known as ANSI 31. That ANSI is the American National Standards Institute. If you don't recall me discussing this, for anything mechanical, that is the governing agency that establishes the rule. That and ASME, you know, there's a couple of different governing institutions that establish standards. But this one is one of the, you know, if not the, one of the biggest. Alright, so in this ANSI 31, what's actually happening is you have these striped lines that are 1/8 inch apart, and the lines are at a 45 degree. So if you look up in the ribbon, it says this is scale 1. When your scale is at 1, it results in the intended display of 1/8 inch spacing. Okay? And when the angle is 0, it's at a 45 degree. I know on the surface that seems confusing, but this means it's at its default state. 1/8 inch spacing, 45 degree. Okay, so I could make changes if I wanted to change the direction of my hatch angle through the ribbon up in here. Alright, so I'm hitting escape and I'm going to zoom back out and let's go over to this shape here and let's apply a couple of different options to our hatch pattern. Okay, so let's go back and select the hatch button, okay, right over here. And this time I want to choose a different pattern. So I'm going to open up the list of patterns. That's this right here. Will let me see the entire list, or I could scroll row by row, but it's easier to see the entire list. And that's not even all of them. In the extreme lower right corner of this, there's a little, looks like little dots. If I position my cursor there, I can drag this out until I see the entire list of patterns. Now, on a side note, AutoCAD allows you to add more symbols to this list. This list is broken down into 4 categories. You have your basic mechanical collection. Anything with AR is your architectural. These would be for gradients. We're going to come back to that. And then you have these AutoCAD ISOs, which mainly is for mechanical, metric, or international standard organization type drawings. Alright, so with that said, let's avoid anything with AR for the moment. For one quick reason, here's AR B816. The 816, and well, first of all, the B means block, architectural block, and it's 8 inches tall by 16 inches wide, which is your classic size of a concrete foundation block. So that's what each one of these little blocks measures. So if your drawing isn't even that big, you're not even going to see anything when you click in the area to apply the hatch. So for now, we're going to avoid anything with AR. So what I want you to do is to choose any other symbol except for, of course, the AR, the gradient, and these AutoCAD ISOs. So there's plenty of others here. Just choose another symbol. For example, I'm going to choose, let's say, gravel. And I'm going to position my mouse between the 2 rectangles and click. Okay, what I want you to notice is that, of course, it avoids hatching the inner shape and around the curve and the text. There's an imaginary bounding box around the text so that it doesn't go right up to the letters, which would look confusing and chaotic, especially if it's all the same color. Now, press enter to complete, and then go back into the hatch command, open up your list, and choose another symbol, not an AR one though, and then select on the outer edges of the circle, and then enter. Now, because we simply drew these shapes freestyle, as soon as we entered into the AutoCAD drawing, they're pretty big, so it's hard to see the spacing when it's a large shape and you're out far. So I would not want that symbol to dominate my drawing like so. When I print it, my eyes are going to be drawn right to that unnecessarily. So what I'm going to do is increase the scale of these patterns to kind of tone down the dominating effect of it. Now that's a subjective thing. Whereas a lot of times you are dictated to what scale it should be, and whether it's dominating or not, that's it. So for now, I'm going to change the scale. So I'm going to put my mouse back onto the hatched area. Notice it's all seen as one object, and click it. Once I click it, the ribbon returns, and I'm going to go up into my scale. And let's say I'll make it 4:1. So I'm gonna click on the 1 and just type in 4, and always make sure you hit enter. Alright, notice the pattern changed. I'm gonna bring my mouse into the drawing and hit escape. And I'm going to increase the scale 2:1 of my gravel. So I'm gonna pick on that, or whatever symbol you used here, and change the 1 to a 2, and then hit escape. Alright, that way it's a little easier to see the pattern. Alright, hatch itself is uh, somewhat smart. It'll allow for some changes after the fact. For example, select on the word text, and when you see the little grip, select the grip and then move to a different location where there's hatch and click again. And you will see that it patched up the hatch here and cut a new hole there. Alright, I'm going to hit escape, and I'm going to do the same thing to the inner rectangle. I'm going to go to move. I'm going to select the inner rectangle and press enter. I'm going to pick just anywhere inside it, and I'm going to move that over to here and click. Okay, so that's good when you're making basic changes. You don't have to worry about the hatch not understanding. However, like I said, it's somewhat smart. I'm going to do something where it is not smart enough to handle what I want. I'm going to go back to move. I'm going to select this rectangle and press enter. And I'm going to move this so that some of it's sticking outside of the overall rectangle. And you can see that it wasn't quite sure what I wanted. For example, let's say I didn't want hatch out here. I just didn't want this area hatched, and I wanted it to ignore out there. So if and when that happens, it's easy enough to just erase it and recreate it by clicking in here. And what happened is I disrupted its outer boundary. And whenever you disrupt its outer boundary, that's when trouble usually occurs. Alright, so I'm going to undo this to get the rectangle back there. Okay, so again, creating hatching is easy. You choose your pattern, you choose your scale, and let's just try one more thing. Let's say I want to rotate this pattern a bit, so I'm going to go back and click on that, and then I see my angle being 0. I'm going to make it 45. I was in 45 degrees, and that rotates. And some patterns like this, you may not even notice, but obviously, most patterns you would be able to clearly tell a rotation. Alright, so that's the basics of applying hatch and editing hatch. Editing is simply clicking it after the fact. Now, one important note before we move on is, although you could explode hatch, by all means do not explode hatch. For example, if I select explode and I click on this and press enter, I am now stuck with many, many individual pieces of line that if I had to erase all this, that would take quite a while, and could be a nightmare, which is one of the reasons why it's imperative to put hatching in its own layer, because I could shut all the other layers off and then just do a big erase window. Okay, but don't explode hatch. Alright, I'm going to undo to just before I exploded it, because I don't want to deal with all those individual lines. Alright, so now I'm safe. Alright, so next thing we're going to do is, let's go to this rectangle, and I want you to make 3 copies of this. So I'm just going to go to the regular copy command, and I'm just going to copy this 3 times. Let's say 1 to the right of it, just so we can keep it in a small area. Actually, go all 3 to the right. Changing my mind on the fly there. I was going to put 2 below it, but this keeps us zoomed in pretty quickly here. Alright, the next thing I want to take a look at is applying gradient hatching. With gradient hatching, you can simulate window effect, and I want to show you that by applying some gradient hatching, for example, let's go back to the hatch button and open up our list, and these are all gradient. That's what the GR stands for. So I might want to emulate a glass effect, and I want the color to start one shade here and didn't mean to select anything. One shade here and blend down to another shade in a linear fashion, top to bottom. Okay, so what I'm going to do is select the gradient linear. Now notice that this goes from left to right. I'm going to want to go top to bottom, so that means we're going to have to rotate this. But in either case, select gradient linear, And I certainly don't want glass effect blue and yellow, so I'm going to change my colors. So I'm going to pick blue, and I've got some different blends of colors here, but if I thought I wanted a greater variation of these colors, I could pick more colors down here. So pick that, and then you get the familiar AutoCAD uh, larger swatch of colors. And then don't forget you've got True Color, Color Book, so you really do have an infinite amount of colors that you could use. I'm going to choose, let's say, just a hint of green, which would be about here. It's a bluish, very light blue greeny look. Okay, so I'm going to choose that as my first color, and then I want a white for the second color. So I'm going to click where it says yellow, and our white color, good old white, is down here. And now when I bring my mouse into this, you can see the linear look from left to right, and I want it to be top to bottom. So I'm going to go to my angle, and sometimes it's a guessing game. What I want to do is rotate it 90 degrees clockwise. So I'm going to type in minus 90 and see if that gets me what I want, which is 270, and there it is. So now I'm going to just click inside there and press enter. Okay, and if I want to criticize and say, you know what, I want a little bit more shade of blue, I could select on the hatch, I could pick this color and then change that, and it'll fix itself. Alright, I'm not going to, I'm going to hit escape. Now, with, let's say, a window, and to give you an even more glass effect, I'm going to draw a little symbol of glass lines, and to do that I want to go back to layer 0. So I'm going to switch to layer 0. And I'm just going to do this quickly by eye, but in a real drawing I'd be a bit more careful about this. I'm going to go to the line command, and I'm just going to draw by eye a line on an angle. And alright, it's locking me in at 45. That's okay. So I'm drawing a short line at 45, and then I'm going to zoom in closer to that. And I'm going to draw another shorter line, visually centered as best as I can by eye, next to it. And then I'm going to mirror that, so at least I have some sort of symmetry. I'm going to mirror this line so it appears in the same spot to the lower right of that line. So I'm going to go to mirror. And I'm going to select that line and press enter. And I'm going to snap to the two endpoints of this line and then enter. Okay, so I'm going to do that again in case anyone needs me to. So I pick the mirror command. I select this short line and press enter. And then the command prompt says first point of mirror line. I'm going to snap to the end point of my big line, and then snap to the other end point of the big line, and then press enter to accept no. Alright, now I'm going to zoom back out, and I'm going to copy this shape twice inside the hatched area. So I'm going to go to copy, I'm going to window this in and press enter, and I'll snap to the midpoint of the bigger line, and I'll click a point here, and I'll pick a point down here, and then enter. Now, when I look at my results, I can't hardly see those glass lines, but here's the thing that you don't think about at this stage. I'm going to select my Layout 1 tab, and then when I zoom in, you're not realizing that white is really black on a piece of paper, so those glass lines are very evident. Okay, and that's a little mini lesson right there, is that whenever you're adding solid hatching or even line hatching, like the ANSI 31, with different colors, always jump into layout space to see what it actually looks like on a white background, which would be your paper. Okay, so that's an important thing not to forget, because you'll be surprised when you print out the drawing and you can't even see things. Right? It's frustrating. Right? So always check in layout space to see the colors. Alright, I'm going to jump back into model, and there's an example of gradient. Alright, let's see another effect of hatching. I'm going to go back in and I want to go back to my sectioning layer, and I want to go to the hatch button, and open up my list, and I'm going to choose, let's say, if I just want to simulate brick and I'm not in a big architectural drawing, I could use this brick. Notice there's no AR in front of it. So I'm going to pick that, and I'm going to put my mouse inside and judge the size of the bricks beforehand. Okay, and let's say, all right, I like. So I'm gonna pick in here and then do the other two while I'm at it, and then enter. Okay, so that's a common thing to do, but there's a negative side effect that we'll get around, but we have to understand what's happening. If I put my mouse back into the shape, all of it lights up, and if I click, it's all seen as one object. So if I wanted to change the scaling or the rotation of my middle shape, I can't do that because they'll all change. Alright, so let's say I go 2, enter. See, I have no individual ability because it's all seen as one. Now, I can correct that. So I just hit escape. I'm going to go back and pick on it. And when I click on it and come back to my hatch ribbon, I would go to the options button, and there's a command called separate hatching. So I'm going to select separate hatching, right? It's in options and then separate hatches, and now I'm going to hit escape, and they're back to 3 individual hatches, and I can treat them, individually as I need. Okay, so that's a good feature. You can't forget it. Alright, another thing about hatching that is, what happens when things go wrong. Here's one of the most common things that'll go wrong. Now, I'm going to make this obvious for the effect here, but most of the time it's not so obvious. Okay, so I'm way out here, and I go to apply hatch. Go back to sectioning. I'm going to go back to my ANSI 31, and I put my mouse in the middle. There's my first clue that something might be wrong, is it doesn't show me the preview of the hatch. And then when I go to click to create the hatch, I get this message. Okay, and this is my dreaded message: a closed boundary cannot be determined. Now, if you're lucky enough, see the red circle that appeared? It's like a big red flag saying, here's the problem. But more often than not, you will not see those 2 circles. And you have to start hunting for the gap. And sometimes it's not so easy, and you can waste valuable time looking for a gap that shouldn't have been there in the first place. So I'm going to hit escape, and I'm going to zoom in and just simply draw a line connecting those 2. And you'll see that those red lines, oops, wrong layer, I'll just put that back in layer 0. You'll see that those circles will disappear when we go to apply the hatch again. Okay, so going to hatch, ANSI 31. See, now we see it. Click, enter, problem solved. So you cannot, as they would say, you have to have a watertight boundary, or you cannot have a gap in the boundary. Otherwise that message, and you won't be able to create the sectioning. Alright, let's talk about one other issue, and pay attention to this one because you will be dealing with this on your homework. This is the issue of transparency and when you want to put things in front of or behind other items. For example, I'm going to go back to layer 0. This is what's known as draw order. And I'm going to click line, and I'm going to draw a line going right through my rectangle. Now, even if I go to layout 1, I do not see that line. Now, there's 2 ways that I can go about making a change so that I do see that line. Number 1 is I can use what's called draw order, and I can select this line and say go on top of or in front of the hatch. Okay, so this is what's known as draw order. So here's how we do that. I select the line, I right click, and I see right in the middle of the pack, draw order. Now observe the choices: bring to front, send to back, bring above, send under. Most of the time you'll be using one of the top two. So what I want to do is bring to front. So I'm going to select bring to front, and I can see right here that the line is visible, and I'm just going to confirm by going into layout, and sure enough, there it is. Now let's reverse this. Let's say that I'm creating my drawing and this occurs, and I don't want to see the line inside the hatched area. So now I'm going to need to send it to the back. So once again, select my line, right click, draw order, send to back. Right, and I can pretty well see that I don't see it, and once again, same thing in layout space. So that was the first way of seeing it or not seeing it, using this draw order. And that's an important tool to use because, like I said, in your homework assignment, it's going to happen when you least expect it. You'll be adding hatching, solid colors, and then all of a sudden a line that you knew was there disappeared. What you're going to have to do is send, a lot of times, send the hatch to the back, send behind everything. Alright, the other way I can see this line is by changing the transparency of this solid hatch. Okay, so that I would do with my ribbon. So I need to select this gradient hatch, and you can see up in here hatch transparency. I could drag my slider and not worry about what the value is. I'm just looking at it for the visual effect, and I'm up at about 25%, and I can see that. And again, I would always recommend switching over to layout because that's a preview of your finished product. And what happens is the intensity of this color tones down. Remember what I showed you about this house here is that these were likely solid colors with a high degree of transparency in here and a lower degree of transparency. It's probably the same color just with different transparency values. Notice also that that's used to create a shading around the eaves. It's a very nice effect, a nice look, and I would recommend trying that as well. In order for me to get this, I would have to temporarily draw a border, right? Because hatch has to be contained in an area. I would apply my hatch, and then my advice is to not erase that border, but put it in a layer and freeze it or shut it off. All right? Because you might need it later, and then if you erased it, it's just a bigger headache to get that back in the exact spot. Alright, but that is the effects of transparency as well. Okay, clicking on the hatch pattern. Oh, I'm in layout. Clicking on the hatch pattern, going up to transparent. I'm going to really crank it up to, let's say, 60%. And then I'm going to go back to layout space, and you can see that it's much less prominent. And those are nice effects. You don't want those areas to dominate the look of your drawing. Okay, so we just covered two topics in one there, transparency and draw order. Draw order is a tool that's necessary to stay on top of when you're creating your hatched drawings with solids or gradients. Now we haven't used a solid, so I just want to cover that one more time, or actually cover that. So I'm going to delete this, and the solid is when I go to hatch. Here it is right here. If we look at the overall list here, it's the first one. So I'm going to click solid. I'm going to change my color. I can do this in one layer and change the color, and let's say I'll pick this real bright orange look. Okay, and then press enter. Now I'm going to go into layout and look at how prominent that is. So if I add some transparency to that, it'll tone that down. So let's say I'll go 50% transparent. Okay, and then I'll go back to layout and look at how toned down that is. Okay, so that's another tool at your disposal when you don't want something to be like a beacon of light in your drawing. Add transparency. Okay, so that concludes the hatching area. I'm going to go back to sectioning, and what I want to do is to just show you how you would set up to create a section view. And that involves your cutting plane line, and it involves adding sections. So I'm going to draw a very simple shape, and follow along with me if you can. I'm in the drawing, I'm just in another area of it. I'm in layer 0, and what I'm going to do is to draw a circle, and let's give that circle a 3-inch diameter. So I'm going to pick for the center, right click diameter, and then say 3, enter. I'm going to zoom into that circle with the 3-inch diameter, and think of that as the top view, and I'm going to draw a front view. So that's going to be rectangular, so I'm going to click rectangle. Now this has a 1.5-inch radius, right? So 1.5 plus 2 for my space between it, right? 1.5 plus 2 would be 3.5, and then I'm going to make this 2 inches tall, which would be 5.5. So what I'm going to do is track off the left quadrant downward 5.5 inches. 5.5, enter. And that's going to represent, oh, that didn't do what I wanted to do. Try it again. Okay, tracking off the left quadrant straight down 5.5, enter. Alright, now I'm going to create a rectangle equal to the diameter, so it's going to be 3 inches wide but 2 inches tall. So I'm going to say at 3, 2, enter. Okay, so if that was rough to follow, let me just throw some dimensions on here so that you can create this at your own pace. So that's a 3-inch diameter circle. It's a 2-inch tall by 3-inch rectangle. So think of this as a cylinder, right? From the top it's round, from the front it looks like a rectangle. But now I'm going to put a hole in it. So I'm going to go back to circle, and I'm going to put a 2-inch diameter hole in it. So now we have a almost a donut-like shape. And I'm going to create a section view that will cut across this, and then we're going to have to convert this to a section. So let's create the cutting plane line first. And if you recall, the cutting plane line is like this. Alright, the difference between this one and ours is going to go across here, and the arrows are going to go down. So it's going to be saying we're cutting across here, and we're going to be looking downward to see what the results of that is, which will take place in our front view. Alright. And I believe I made a mistake. The arrows are going to be pointing upwards. My apologies. Arrows will be pointing upwards, and we'll be looking into that cut surface, and that will be our front view. Alright, now AutoCAD does not give us any direct way to create a cutting plane line, which is a little frustrating, but here is our workaround. Number one, we're going to create a layer called cutting plane line. So I'm going to my layer properties, to my new layer button, and I'm going to call it exactly what its name is, cutting plane line. I'm going to make, let's say, that cyan, the light blue, and as you can see in the picture here, the line style for a cutting plane line is phantom, right? Phantom, so it's long, two shorts, long, and a repeating pattern of that, which is what's known as a phantom line. So we're going to load the line type called phantom. So I pick for my layer cutting plane line, I'm clicking continuous, I'm going to load, and I'm going to click anyone in the list and hit the letter P on the keyboard. Alright, brings me right to phantom. So I'm selecting phantom, okay, selecting it again, okay, and now I have my layer with the correct line type. I'm going to make that current and then close out my layer list. And if I just draw a test line, you'll see this phantom line pattern. Okay, so now I need the other line with the arrows on it. So we're going to use an old command called quick leader, and that will give us the arrows, but we have a little bit of a restriction. With quick leader, you would type in the letter QLE, enter, right? QLE. With quick leader, when I pick and move away from there, it'll give me my arrowhead, right? And because I'm in the cutting plane line layer, let's say I click here and then I draw a longer line, you'll see, and then enter, right? You will see that the phantom line pattern appears. Okay, but I will not be able to draw another line and get the arrow on the other end. All right, I can only click and get the arrow on my click point. So we're going to have to use that information and say, all right, I'm going to draw a cutting plane line that'll start over about here, and it'll come in and it'll stop at the center, and then I'll mirror that to the other side. Okay, so it's a workaround, but key thing there is it works. So I'm in my layer. I'm going to type in again QLE, press enter, and I'm going to start by eye about here, click, and then I'm going to track off the quadrant point over, because that has to be a right angle, and then click, and then just go right to the center point, click, and enter. Now I didn't get my phantom line, and by the way, this command wants you to go on and do other things, but just hit escape. I didn't get my phantom line because of the LT scale. Alright, so I'm going to type in LT scale and set it to 0.5, and there we go. Now if I still didn't get it, I would click it and go into properties and set that to 0.5. We've done that hopefully many times by now. Now I'm going to mirror this. So I go to mirror, select my cutting plane line, enter, snapping to the center, and I'm going to move my mouse either straight up or down, click, and then enter. So there's my cut plane line. We often cannot control where these little gaps exactly fall, but this is fine. This is fine. Now I need to draw this as a section view, so I have to go back to my layer 0, and what would normally be hidden, right? You'd see hidden lines for the inner circle. Because we're cutting this open and looking into that cut surface, these are no longer hidden, they're going to be object lines. So I'm in layer 0, I go to line, and I'm going to track off the 9 o'clock quadrant of the inner circle straight down, and draw across, and repeat that at the 3 o'clock quadrant of the inner circle, straight down. And then I'm going to switch to my layer section and add my hatch. Right, here's my hatch button over here. ANSI 31. Now you have to be careful. Anything you change here will stay changed until you change it again. So my color, even though I'm in the layer sectioning, might be overridden here to this color. So let's see what happens first. Yeah, it is. So we need to reset this. So I'm going to pick up in here and say by layer. Right? My layer is sectioning and it's green. Now I can come back and click and come over in here and click again and then enter. Okay, so I added some ANSI 31 hatch, which is the striped. I had to be careful with my hatch settings. They were left over from an earlier example, and the same might happen with angle, scale, transparency, so you have to be on the ball with those settings up there. Alright, the only thing I would need to do to finish this up would be to put a center line down the middle and center lines in here, and if need be, complete my dimensions. Alright, but the focus of this was to show you cutting plane lines. Okay, so how did we create a cutting plane line? We had to be a little creative, and we had to create a layer called cutting plane line. We had to use the phantom line style in that layer, and we had to use the quick leader, or type in QLE, to be able to draw a line that had an arrowhead on one end. Okay, so it's a little bit of a compromise, but it worked. Alright, so let's go on to the last topic here, the CTB, which stands for color table. Okay, so if we go back to the topics here, so we're talking about this right here. We saw a little bit of this last class, like I said earlier, with the walls, making them, the red walls, black and thick lines. So let's just review and poke around on some of that again. I'm going to come back to this. I zoom in and pan to this, and I'm even going to go to layout. Okay, and the grid is certainly distracting to me, so I'm going to double click to activate my layout, and then down here turn my grid off. Okay, sometimes, certainly now, the grid is not productive, so I'm shutting that off and then double clicking outside the layout so that I'm locked in here. Alright, so let's take a little closer look and say, for a good presentation, let's say that I want my black lines to be thick. I don't want the light blue, so I can barely see it. I want to reassign the light blue to be a darker blue. Okay, all of that would be done in a color table file. So I need to go to my print button, and for this example I'm going to go with the E plot, alright, DWF6 E plot PC3. I can't do a print preview unless I define a printer, so that's one of the main reasons. If it's on none, watch this. If I go back to none, look, your preview button is grayed out. So I want to do a preview. I'm not going to print anything, so I have to choose something other than none. Alright, so let's see what the preview shows us without changing anything. Yeah, you can see that this is, nice, bright, prominent colors. Alright, so what we're going to do over here, this is your CTB area. Now, one of the, before I fear of forget, one of the biggest things you have to worry about is if you have transparency, and we do, right, for the window, and I believe I made that transparent. Notice how bright this orange became when I looked at the preview. Okay, it certainly doesn't look like that, and this doesn't look as prominent in my layout here. And that is because of this right here. This is what is deadly. It's easy to forget. Plot transparency. And look, it is not checked. And when it's not checked, it prints the colors at their full intensity. So before we forget, let's click plot transparency. Now watch, I'll do another preview. And these things are nowhere as prominent as they were, which is nice. Okay, so a little side road there. Click plot transparency. Now let's go up to the color table settings. So I'm going to click that, and what we want to do is create a new color table. So I'm going to come all the way down to the bottom here and say new. And this is going to bring us on a three-step wizard. Let me back up a second and make a suggestion. I'm going to cancel this out. Likely you'll have a lot of colors and you're not going to remember all the specifics. So before we click here, let's move this dialog out of the way as much as possible so that you can still get to this button so that I can see my colors. So now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to click New. And I'm going to say Start from Scratch and Next. And my advice is give this a name that represents the drawing that you're using. So for this, for your homework assignment, it's going to be sectioning or hatching of a house elevation. So I'm going to call this house, even though what's behind here is not, house elevation. And then I'm going to select Next. And I'm not going to recommend doing anything here. Just go right to finish. So the only thing we had to do with that wizard when we said new is say start from scratch, give it a name, in this case house elevation, and then finish. Now we need to adjust this, right? And that's what this button is for right here. Okay. So if you rest your mouse on it, it's edit the color table, the plot style table. So I'm going to pick on that. All right. And now I can move this around and see my colors. So let's say the first thing I want to address is the cyan color. I don't want cyan to print cyan. So anything on this list on the left is the colors you see within the drawing. And if it says, when you select one of these, if it says use object color, for example, red is selected, so because it says use object color, whatever is red here is going to print red. So we don't want that for cyan. So I'm going to select cyan. I'm going to select use object color, and I want that to be dark blue, or the regular blue color. So I'm going to pick that. Now, just to show you that immediate change, I'm going to say save and close, and then we're going to do a preview. And you'll see the cutting plane line is no longer cyan. I should zoom in a little closer here. Okay. Now, notice we don't see the phantom line pattern. And I'm going to pause a second, try to think of why that is. Okay. And it's hard to see because it's cyan, but I don't think we see it here either. The answer is because of the PSLT scale, right? Those little things come back to haunt you. So I should actually cancel out of all this, type in PSLT scale, 0, enter, and continue, but I'm going to leave it as is. Alright, so that's the first change we made. We made cyan to become blue. The next thing I want to do is make black thicker. So I'm going to click color 7. Now I want to use that object color, but I want to change its line weight. Now, if I click right on here, the default unit is millimeter, and I don't want millimeter. Alright, so I'm gonna click in here to collapse that list, and I have to come down and say edit line weights before I change thicknesses. So I'm going to pick edit line weight, and all I have to do is select inches. I don't do anything else in here, just go to inches, pick OK, and now for black lines, I want to keep them black, but I'm going to go to edit line weight, and you begin seeing some good thickness at the 0209. Okay, and then I'm going to say save and close, and we'll do another preview. Now, this drawing, we're just kind of making it up as we go along, but this is not going to be good because these glass lines are going to be thick and probably bleed into one another. So that's the importance of making layers. I should create a layer for glass with a different color, maybe a dark gray or something, and put these lines in there so that this is not affected by what's about to happen. So let's do a preview. All right, and when I zoom in, you'll see what I'm talking about. See how these are so thick and bleeding together now, and how these lines are much thicker as well. Okay, that looks a little crazy there too. The leader line was affected by the line weight, but for some reason the numbers aren't. Not quite sure where that is, but so when you start using CTB files, you really have to have your layers organized to know that if I choose a color to make it a different color and thick, be aware of the things that will be affected on that. And with proper use of that, it really makes a drawing look good. And that's the name of the game. If you're giving any kind of presentation, it's all about the look, and AutoCAD gives you a lot of ways of making that look good, but you got to be on top of it. Okay, so you'll take a look at your assignment file, and there's 2 drawings with this assignment. The auxiliary drawing, which we talked about in the last lesson, and then the hatching and section lines. Alright, so reading through these instructions, you're going to open up your House Elevation 2018 drawing. You're going to window in the whole thing and do a right click, clipboard copy, and I can demonstrate that here even though it's not that drawing. So I'm going to window in the whole drawing, right click, clipboard copy, and then I would open up my title block drawing, go into model space, and then right click paste. Okay, so we're getting the drawing out of where you're getting it from and putting it into your title block drawing. Then I want you to go to that page 690. Let's remind us of that one. Okay, and I want you to take a good look at this, and I want you to emulate this in your assignment. So I want you to use good colors, good hatch scale and patterns. And one bit of advice, you're going to have trees and shrubs in your drawing, and thankfully it's in its own layer. Turn that layer off when you're creating your hatching. Then when you're done, turn that layer back on. It's going to put the trees and shrubs on top of it or in front of the house, which is as it should be. Okay, so I'm reading from the handout now. It's saying add the appropriately scaled hatch, see page 690, to show all materials, including semi-transparent color, to the facade of the house at the eaves, right? That's this shading. I want you to put the shading on there. Use colors to represent different line weights, and I want you to create a CTB file. Okay, and I want you to adjust the thicknesses. So this, as you can see in the bold and the end of step 2, this will be a significant portion of the assessed grade, is how good it looks. Okay, so when you're plotting, you're going to create your custom CTB file for line weights and colors. You're going to save this as section XX. XX is your first and last name, and with your appropriate day of the class after. Ideally, I want this plotted on 18 by 12 paper, so you're actually going to be printing it in the colors that you used and on your full-size title block paper. And you're going to email me the file, and you're going to submit the hard copy in the next class. Okay, so those 2 drawings, the auxiliary and the sectioning, is part of this overall lesson. Good luck, and I look forward to seeing your results.